we're going to have in this panel Sophia Burton from Collidoscope, Mohsen Naderia, from Helpling, Alen Tabakovic from the Moving Network, Robert Olechna from Mosaic International, Lorna from Refugee Voices, and we're going to have also Kashio joining us in the panel. She's from an international development expert. Kashio has a diverse academic background, having studied human resources management, French and Spanish, and comparative culture. She also has a master in international humanitarian psychology. In her professional career, Jung has over 15 years' experience in the international humanitarian and development sector in over 10 countries, namely MSF, International Red Cross, and the UN. She currently works as a peer counselor for expatriate families and offers psychological support to refugees in Berlin. Can we have a warm round of applause, please?
Okay, so I'm going to be mediating the panel, and I'm very excited to see so many people. We had to get extra chairs, just especially, but I think it's going to be a great discussion with lots of diverse perspectives. And how it's going to work, I'm just going to ask one opening question, and then it's really all down to you. So I hope you prepared your questions when you were listening to the past presentations. And the idea is we're looking for kind of short, dynamic answers so that everyone can participate. But I'm just going to start with one question. So, cultural integration or cultural inclusion of refugees? Which one would you choose? And how should it look to you? So maybe if we'd like to start with Lorna, what do you think?
Yeah, I think inclusion is a much better word because, yeah, everybody should be included in society. What should it look like? I mean, I'm foreign in Berlin. What does my cultural inclusion look like? First of all, trying to learn a language, understand the country I'm in, and get to know people here who also live here. That being said, I'm also foreign here, and I wasn't forced to go through any kind of cultural integration or cultural inclusion. So that brings up a point. Why, as a foreign person, am I not forced to do it, but other foreign people have to because of the places that they're from? So I think it's a very difficult issue. I think there's a lot of platforms in Berlin right now helping people to get involved, like cooking groups, art projects. I think there needs to be more of it. I think there needs to be more outreach. And I think there needs to be more involvement from the German government to encourage and fund these kinds of projects as well.
Thank you very much. How about you, Robert? What do you think?
I think, as I was stumbling over my words in my presentation, yeah, inclusion is definitely the way to go. It's a two-way street. I originally come from the United States, but my ancestors were European, and the places they came from in Europe were often fraught with strife in the 19th century. And as they arrived in New York City at that time, there was oftentimes not a very pleasant welcome. And at least in the culture there, people think, well, you know, it's tough here. You have to get on and find your place, elbow your way into it. And I don't necessarily think that that's the best thing, especially when you're coming already being elbowed out of a place or having made this journey, used so much energy and courage to make the journey out. So Europe is now in a time of peace, for almost 50 years over since the Second World War. And I think people here have, in general, I think we as a people have forgotten the strife that our ancestors had gone through 3 generations ago. So it's important for us to meet in the middle. You know, obviously, refugees have to make an effort to integrate themselves, learn the language, but it can only go so far. If there's no motivation to do so, then it's extremely difficult. So the society itself has to reach out. I think Berlin has done a brilliant job. I mean, the people I work with on the ground, from Kreuzberg, Hilf, for example. So.
Thank you. And Sophia, what do you think?
Obviously, inclusion. As I said in my presentation, I think that inclusion is a better frame because it puts the onus on everyone within the process and lets everyone feel valued for who they are in an ideal world. I would add that I think part of cultural inclusion, what it should look like is knowing what is culture and what is not culture. I think we talk about culture a lot, and not everyone defines it the same way, and we kind of use it as almost an excuse sometimes, or just brush it off as a general term. And for instance, one example would be, there's this idea in the United States that Asians are really smart and they really value education, and it is part of their culture. And this is not necessarily the case. A lot of this has to do with capital, the types of communities that immigrants enter into, and the networks they have, and the access to resources they have that allow them to be more successful. It's not, you can't just simplify it and say Asians care about education and African Americans don't, and that's why one group is more successful than the other. If you look at it, you have to again look at it from the historical and the context politically. And for instance, in Japan, Koreans are looked at much more negatively than they are in the United States. So we can't just say culture is the reason why someone should be included or shouldn't be included. And personally, I think a lot of it comes down to education. So in my ideal society, education would be much more inclusive of different perspectives and more multicultural, not just let's celebrate, this particular culture on this month or this day, but including it in the actual curriculum and allowing different students to share their perspectives.
Thank you. And Alen?
Well, why choosing? Why not both? Why not both integration and inclusion? I had experience in the past working for the UNICEF, and we were working with the groups, certain groups of within the Bosnian community. I'm coming from Bosnia, and they were not socially included in society. And it is a difficult thing to achieve. And looking at these two things separately, I think it's wrong. Why don't see it as a package? Because people both need to feel integrated, but both to feel socially included with the society. Mm-hmm. So for that reason, I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. I think they're both, that they come as a package.
That's very inclusive of you. Thank you. And June, what do you think?
Yeah, hi everyone. In case you're thinking, who is this extra person who hasn't given a presentation? So just to quickly introduce myself. My name's June. I work in one of the refugee shelters here in Neukölln. I'm a social psychologist, so I actually do a lot of psychosocial support through Focus, women groups. I do resilience building, motivational workshops for young men, and family support as well. When it comes to culture integration or inclusion. One of the things when I speak about integration with the women mainly that I've spoken to, their perception of integration is seen quite differently. And I don't know if it's a word terminology thing, but there is kind of a fear of understanding, integration courses or integration as denouncing my own values. Putting those values aside and having to, and becoming German and coming here to kind of denounce my religious values, my traditions, my customs, and have to fit in. And that's sort of the fear I've kind of come across from talking to different women, that there is this reluctancy, and I feel that there is a lot of fundamental explanation that needs to be done. And for me, integration is not a one-way, imposed integration. It has to be a two-way process for those who are hosting them as well. So I think when we talk about training programs, educational programs, it's not only to, providing these activities or programs to refugees, but it should also be educating to those who are also giving these programs, like helping the helpers sort of programs. So that's the way I see it.
Thank you very much, June. And I'll just... There we go. And now I'll ask Mohsen for his thoughts.
Well, I clearly agree with inclusion, but I also think that this whole idea of adapting people to a whole package of a culture will never work. I think people should contribute with the capacities that they have. They should be able to maintain their identities, and that's actually beautiful to have diversity in that way. And Sylvia had a great point about democratic values and the way we understand them. I think we all have to go through a global integration, understanding what diversity is and how people can contribute to the well-being of a society in whatever way they wish to, as while they maintain their identities as well. So that's what I think.
Thank you very much. So maybe we should think about renaming the symposium, just one thought. But I particularly like the idea of maybe global integration for everyone, so either maybe cultural inclusion or integration for everyone. And now I'd like to open the floor, so if anyone has any questions, we might collect a couple. Saskia's going to be collecting, so maybe a show of hands who has a question for the panel. You can direct your question to one person, or it can be a question for everyone. Don't be shy.
We've solved all the problems.
Let's all go home. There's a question in the back.
We're going to be collecting them, so we're going to grab a few questions first, and then the panel can reply.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pedro. I'm from Brazil, and actually I'm one of the organizers of the event. And when I first had the idea of creating such an event, I stayed thinking for a while, because I'm actually working directly with refugees as a volunteer in a soccer project. What would you, also working on the ground and directly with them, would consider that could be done better in your perspective, in the perspective of your organizations? What kind of things we could have done better, or we can do better in order to improve the process of welcoming, hosting, coordinating, and cooperating, or being solidary with them? It's a general question.
Okay, so that's one question. And I see we've got another hand there. So if we can collect the second question, and then we'll open it for our panelists to answer.
My question goes in the same direction and is directed to everyone. My question is, like, there are new NGOs popping up, and how do you actually include yourself into the service system that had been there for a really long time? There is like BBZ and things like that, or the Flüchtlingsrat, who are working for a very long time with refugees in Berlin. Do you connect with these institutions? Do you try to not just focus on doing nice things with refugees, but also forcing rights for them, also pointing out the problems that are there in the field? Because I think it's a bit problematic to say Berlin did a great job. Berlin failed completely. That's fact, and it's still failing. So it would be wonderful if we come out today or in future with more connection between us, the people who are doing things, and then to have more supervision and stuff for people who are helping. Because I'm working with the students who are volunteering as well, and we try to have supervision for them. We try to professionalize them in what they're doing, and I think it's very much needed in the ground, where loads of individual groups and institutions are popping up.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to open it now to the panelists. So I believe the first question was, on the ground, what do you think you could be doing? What do you think could be done better? And also, how can we really connect all these initiatives that are going on and get beyond the kind of superficial exchange into the deeper questions that we need to be answering through these programs? Who would like to start? Okay.
I think that your question was answered by your question, in my opinion. The thing that we could do better is to connect. I was actually talking about this during the break. I've been involved for a few years now. Last year saw this surge in support, which is obviously a great thing. People welcoming the people coming as refugees and starting these initiatives, but not doing it together, or thinking maybe I could see if this already exists and then get involved, and we could channel all the things that we're doing and do it on a big scale. This is the biggest issue here. When I started to try to contact organizations to tell them that there are already organizations doing something that you're doing, I was met with a hostile response, and I questioned why. And the reason was that a lot of people started organizations as social businesses, and they were creating jobs for themselves through gaining funding. Now, there's nothing wrong with getting funding to do a job that needs to be done. But if there's somebody already doing that job, why can't you join forces? And all of a sudden, there was this strange competitiveness in Berlin in these circles. And I think this is a really huge issue. And I think if we just put that all behind us and say, okay, maybe some people are going to get paid for this, maybe some people will be on a higher level, maybe not, and just realize that this is actually a humanitarian crisis that we need to deal with together, then we can start to actually make a change.
Thank you. Anyone else like to share their thoughts on this question?
Yeah. Well, first question to the guy from Brazil, right? So what should be done differently, and actually that is what we want to be done differently, is to have, this is what we basically do, to have refugees or people, immigrants who are coming to Germany included in the project, not only as a mere observer of activities and of the project, but as participants, as equal participants in this cooperation. And this is, I think, really important, because one is many times overlooking one thing, that people are not necessarily motivated by extrinsic motivation. Many times they are motivated by their intrinsic motivation, by their will to help their community. So I think that's really important, this key. And another thing is we are actually not an NGO organization. We are a scientific project, and yeah, for that reason I think we are a bit different than the others. So yeah, I think networking is important, because all the concepts have something good in that, and we don't think that there is actually a big solution. Everyone is offering a little bit of solution, so our approach is kind of different in that regard.
Thank you very much. In particular, I'd like to hear from June. What do you think could be done better on the ground?
Oh my goodness, so much to do. Yeah, so just to pick up on Alan's part, I absolutely agree that I think we have the assumption that refugees are helpless victims, if you like, and really labeled as refugees and not human, like dignified humans who do have, who have had a life, who've had a profession, good education, and to kind of put them in a helpless place as beneficiaries. Well, okay, officially call them beneficiaries if we are helping them. But I think in a lot of new programs, initiatives, there really has to be a push on giving them more ownership, and create. And our role should be to facilitate that process, creating that space where they need help, rather than us coming up with ideas and deciding for them what they need best. And the simple thing is to ask, what are your needs? And not to categorize everybody in one bag. Syrians are different from Syrian Palestinians, Syrian Christians, different minority groups have different needs as well. So I think there has to be a bit more kind of research and understanding of the population and the groups that we are dealing with, and also to really cater to the individual or the specific needs. And why not give them that space, give them that opportunity to thrive? And for me, from a psychosocial point of view, this is the best way of healing, rather than going into, seeing a shrink and doing therapeutic work. So that would definitely be the approach that I would take, through participatory approach and giving them ownership. And one example that we had in the shelter just last week, we had a Frühlings party, so a spring party, and the idea was, this day event on this day, from what time to what time, and the people, the residents in the shelter, had to decide for themselves how they're going to make this day. So they decided the menu. We got rid of the usual catering company that we have. They decided themselves to have Afghan food, Iraqi food, different food from from different families, as their host, in a way to also thank Berlin and Neukölln community, because we have the mayor of Neukölln as well there. And the stage was there. We created that stage, we created that space, but it was for them to decide what they want to do. There was theatrical plays, there were stand-up comedy, there was music, instruments, and it was wonderful. And this is so needed and so powerful, and I think more initiatives like this needs to be done, in my view. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Anyone else like to answer on either of those questions? So what we could be doing better, or how we could actually connect these different initiatives?
I just want to stress again that for as long as we think competitively and we look at it like as initiatives, we look at it as a race, and we hold on to capitalist thinking, we cannot solve this problem. As initiatives, a lot of merging should have happened, because there's a lot of overlapping. And because we think within the capitalist framework, and we think everything is competition, and we don't understand collaborative economy, and that we can merge, join forces, and do something just because we want to have a better society that we all live in. I think this is an element that we could have done a lot better on. So. Yeah, I just wanted to stress on that.
Thank you. Anyone else like to share their thoughts?
We could have, but we can start now for sure.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, sure.
So that's what I was mentioning before. It's very important. I would like to actually be connected to all of you at the end, just so we can work forward together. I would say it's one of the things to improve on the ground, speaking purely from being in the camps, for example, a lot of the groups don't get along. This is something we didn't anticipate in the very beginning. We had people from a few different countries, and we'd invite them along for the tours, for the lessons, and the language courses, and some folks wouldn't come because others were there. And so we're trying to figure this out now, how we can still maximize our resources whilst bringing everyone in, which isn't possible sometimes. So this is a small issue within the camps themselves, and they're still in the camps because even the Syrians are still waiting on their paperwork. And there was an article in Die Zeit about 3 weeks ago giving average wait times, and Syrians were waiting on average 9 months. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And so Afghans, Iraqis, 18, 20. So in the camps themselves is where the work needs to be done. Of course, the services on the outside, the government as well. So this is why, your words ring true. We have to work together, maximize our resources, and
Yep.
Just had
Lorna?
one more thing to say. My involvement with this began as a political movement, something that lasted for 2 years. It was an Occupy movement. It was a big movement. It made big waves in Germany, and it's basically one of the reasons that last year there was this refugees welcome attitude at the beginning. I think it's up to us to get political. We have to ask ourselves, is it okay that there are people living in the city in these kinds of conditions? Am I okay with that? In the 21st century in Germany, does this have a place? And I think that's a really important thing, because we were speaking about it in the break, actually. A lot of these people have come from places where they've been involved in the politics and revolutions, and they are scared of doing that again. And so they don't want to be the ones to stand up and say, the conditions in my camp are unacceptable, because they're afraid of what might happen to them if they do it. And I think that we need to say, as people who aren't afraid, as people who maybe do have more of a voice, to say that this isn't okay and we won't stand for it.
Thank you. And Sophia, any final comments?
Sure, so I'm not the only one who didn't contribute. I would say, speaking about integration or inclusion as a two or multi-way process, that probably, and I know some of this is being done, I can't speak for everywhere, but more intercultural training, I guess is one way to put it, for the people who do this type of work. volunteer in Rathaus Wilmersdorf. It's a very big accommodation for about 1,400 refugees, mostly from Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq. And I started out in the Frauenzimmer, or Frauenraum, the women's room. And I've met a lot of different volunteers. What's great about the way it's set up, not just there, I mean, with Volunteer Planner, you just, put in a login, you sign up, you show up, and you're involved. And I think that's great in getting people involved, but there's very little kind of induction, orientation, anything like that. Of course, resources are scarce. But what I've noticed meeting different volunteers is that sometimes, just because people volunteer doesn't mean they don't have their own preconceptions or their own stereotypes, and sometimes those can get reinforced in these experiences. For instance, I now teach a literacy class. I showed the picture earlier to these Afghan women who are mostly illiterate. But the reason the class was started was not because they're illiterate and they need a different type of teaching, but because they weren't going to the other German class because there were men in that class. Or depending on who you ask at the home, because their husbands wouldn't let them go. And some of the female volunteers were asked to participate and help teach this class, and they refused because they said, why should we do this? Like, they're in Germany, and this is how we do things in Germany. Men and women interact. Isn't it in their best interest for them to integrate into our way of life as quickly as possible? And I'm actually writing an article about this for Collidoscope right now, hopefully coming out soon, because I think this is such an interesting dynamic. That reinforces this idea that it's not just about integrating them. And what's the goal here? Is it better to not offer the class and then they don't show up and they don't learn at all? Or is it better to kind of deal with this step by step and give them the opportunity and think about our own perspective as volunteers and how we can best address this issue?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And I'm very happy to hear everyone mentioning collaboration in their comments, and to see you all here. Hopefully something will come of this. We'll make connections and we'll see what happens from there. And also a couple of things I picked up on was talking about facilitating access. And for me, it's always the question of what's the balance between facilitating access and then directing activities. You have to be so careful to just facilitate access. And as June was saying, then the stage is for the people to do what they want to do with, and for giving people a voice, but without misrepresenting them. So these are things we always have to be very, very careful about if we are going to be working in this area. And I'd like to open the floor again to any questions for the panelists. We have one question over there.
Thank you. Hello? Is it working?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, well, you can hear me enough. Yeah? Okay. This is also from what Sophia was just saying. It's a question about, to what extent would you say, or do you feel that examining your position of privilege is one to help, perhaps, or the rhetoric of decolonization, de-imperialization, decapitalization is of our minds, ourselves, and examining also our own internalized prejudices, which is not really a fun thing to do, but to what extent do you feel that is part of the process?
Okay. And any other questions in the audience? Saskia? Oh, very good.
When do we get to the comment part of the program?
I think we're on the question. Well, share your comment. Go on.
I'm a 60s guy. And I've heard a lot of this before. This is nothing new. There have been mass migrations throughout the history of humanity. I think we should look at those things and study them. Mm-hmm. To me, in a certain sense, and I'm not necessarily, let me say first, I'd like to thank you guys for your engagement in all these social issues. I think you're doing a good job. Anybody that gets out there and digs in and gets their hands dirty and tries to do something to change the situation needs to be applauded, and certainly I appreciate your efforts. But we don't want to get into the, can't see the forest for the trees syndrome. And I think to a certain extent, not necessarily you people here, I'm not directly referring to you, but in general, the question is, you're so involved, in a particular thing, you can't step back and see the totality of the situation. I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine just 2 days ago, and she was talking about some issue, you know, and very grounded in the moment. And I said, no, I think you need to step back and have a more cosmic view of things, you know. And I think humanity is, don't forget, is a work in progress. You know, so we tend to forget that, you know, that this is basically, we're developing day by day, and we're learning from our mistakes and from the things that we've done well, all right? But when I say cosmic, I mean cosmic, because sometimes I think we need to step outside the planet Earth and just look at it, you know, and recognize what's going on. A lot of people don't realize the world is not flat. You know, I mean, there's that debate going on right now, you know, and there are problems that we have that need to be addressed, you know, but it's only through being involved and not being involved, that whole process, that we'll be able to, like, you know, come to some kind of conclusion and perhaps a solution, all right? And I don't want to get too deep into this, but I think, you know, we humans, we're so arrogant. And part of our arrogance, you know, like flows from the fact that we think we're the only beings out here. Now, if there are, I'm not going to get into no space thing here, but just imagine, you're talking about refugees, and you're talking about migrants. We have a space program that's going to go out here and migrate to other planets, you know, but as arrogant as we are, I would bet 9 times out of 10 we want to supplant or overlay our values on that other environment. You know, we're going to plant our flag. We already got a flag on the moon. Okay? I mean, that's a clear indication, you know? And this is part of our problem, you know, that we have to recognize what the problem actually is. And I'm sorry, guys, you know, in the main, we have not been discussing the real issues here. You said that your people come to Europe, a place at peace. Well, Europe is not at peace. Europe is responsible for so much suffering. They're selling arms all over the country, all over the world. If you look at the main exporters of weapons, the first 5 spots are right here in Europe. So how can this, we're in the eye of the hurricane. That's where we are. And other people are trying to get here and take advantage of the benefits. And people here recognize that they're doing that in the end, when you sum it all up. And we are taking the vast majority of the resources and the opportunities are taken by us, leaving very little for the other people. We have to deal with that. That's part of the equation. I'm sorry. You know, that has to be dealt with, and we have to tackle that, and people have to talk about it. I'm getting angry not hearing this part in the discussion. And I'm not just talking about you guys. I'm just talking about in general, you know, because the politicians do it best. You know, people are coming here because they talk about the economic refugees. Yeah, you're goddamn right. You know, I want to eat every goddamn day. I want to go to school. You know, I want some medical attention. You know, I want a fucking future. Yes. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's been the history of humanity from the very beginning. And we need to wake up to that.
May I make a comment on that?
Yes, please.
I agree with you. I think that's absolutely true. I think there's a scope. There's a scope, though. There's a scope. I think we're all on the same page. I think we're all in agreement that we need to have political action on a global scale that supports human rights. We're all for that. And what she said before about getting political, I think we need to go there. But the scope of what we're doing here is trying to, maybe you might call it a Band-Aid, but we're trying to address a situation, we're trying to fill a hole that our governments are failing us. Yeah? And so that's what we are doing here. And I think that we're doing a damn good job. Yeah? And we'll get there, hopefully. Hopefully we can fight back and fight the good fight politically. So.
I've been trying to get there for 67 years.
Oh, if you're from the 60s,
now.
then you've been trying a long time, huh?
Right. But thank you very much for your comment. And I think we do need to see this from a more historical perspective. It's
Absolutely.
not a new situation, but maybe we can come up with a new solution. And we'll also take in mind the previous question about internal prejudice that maybe we need to face. And I think we did see another question in the back. So Saskia, did you have a question? Okay, and then we can answer. Okay.
Oh, excuse me.
It was a little bit similar to what he said. A lot of migrants or refugees or people who are coming to here and say what they find here. First of all, about you don't feel different, you must integrate, but okay, I will put you in a place to be there, everyone will see you like a different person. You must integrate with us, but like just be with your people. It's something like this. And the other point he talked about is with like a lot of people who came from here, most of the countries, the war is there, it's Europe supported. Maybe not supported directly, but in a lot of ways. Syria and Palestine and a lot of things. How I am, like when I am coming to here and find this, some people here, we don't need you, we don't want you, okay. From Africa, you were stealing me from 60 years, steal my oil, my things here, and I came just to take maybe small part of that, and you just push me out. When these feelings, when some people have it and came to here and they will have this, what the people here are saying about it, like here will become the most important problem. Because these people here, I try to be in your side, but you don't want me to be in your side. From the biggest problem, it's like to don't accept that, like, or not accept, like, to understand the people who are coming here. They're coming probably from our government, or what she did, or other government like us, or ally with us. So this is the biggest problem. And my question was how you can, if you see it a problem, how you can find a solution for it, or like, thing to do for that.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the questions combine quite well, actually, as well. So how do we face our own internal prejudices from our own cultural backgrounds, maybe what our countries have contributed in the past, and our own personal biases, maybe. And how do we find a solution to that if we are going to be working in this field? So I'll open questions. Who would like to start with this question? Yeah?
Well, to the first part of the question, I would say that we are already dealing with this through our BOP ambassadors, because in that regard, they are the teachers, and they are actually showing to the world the different picture that they can be persons who are competent and educated and capable of holding lectures in a language that is not their own, because these lectures are not only reserved for the people within the refugee community, but outsiders as well. So I think it's a start to change, to get rid of this prejudice that we might have because of our own beliefs and because of our own culture. As for the other question, I'm sorry I didn't get it.
Not to worry, just... No, but I think you answered it quite well with your comment. Would anyone else like to share their thoughts on this?
The cultural question, yes.
Go on.
Our cultural bias.
Yeah.
I think it obviously plays into part of it, but echoing what I said to the gentleman in the front row there, you know, if you come at it from a point of view of human rights, international law. This is laws that most organized states have agreed upon. I think it's a starting point, you know, and from that we develop further, and we try to remain as objective as we can. Obviously, it doesn't work. I mean, I'm giving history lessons on German history, so I'm neither German nor have I been raised here. But so how does that go, right? I mean, obviously there's some sort of bias, but yeah. So my answer would be that we have to stay true to the international law, the international human rights laws that we've agreed upon, and build from there, I would say.
Okay, thank you. And June?
Yeah, I think there's no better time than now, really, to address this prejudice. I mean, we're seeing with our own eyes, with EU failing as they're putting up fences. Isn't that already enough evidence that this is happening? You know, I think, so going to your point about being political, we have to remember we do have these international frameworks. you know, the international humanitarian law, we have the international human rights, we have the German constitution as well, which is failing also. And I think, you know, we have a duty, we have an obligation as citizens, members of our local communities, to actually point the finger to the German government, to the decision makers, because politics, all the decisions actually are motivated by politics. And I think we have an opportunity here to work together, because we are observing, we are, you know, with our own eyes, with our own hands, what is happening. We have enough stories from the complaints that I think Sophia mentioned earlier as well. I think we have enough evidence to put this together and maybe do a whole movement, a public movement in Berlin, in whole of Germany, and actually put this to the political leaders, decision makers, and actually make a change through that.
Thank you very much. And again, we're hearing the word connection and together, so this is not something we do by ourselves. We really have to join forces to have any impact. Anyone else who'd like to share their thoughts on this question, or should we open to the panel again, to the audience, I mean?
I think I just want to go back to what I said towards the beginning of this discussion. We're talking about cultural integration, cultural inclusion, whatever that means in a city that's so international. Why is it okay that there's, okay, I'll give you an example. Right now in my apartment building, there's a cafe opening on the ground floor. It's being opened by some New Yorkers. It's a vegan donut place. I have nothing against that. Yeah, I know. But everything is in English. There is nothing in German. The people who run it don't speak German. Now, let's think about this. If this was a group of Syrian people opening a Syrian cafe and everything was in Arabic and they didn't speak German, what kind of reaction would you see then? Why are we talking about the cultural integration of refugees and not of foreign people in Germany? Because that's a bigger topic and we should all be treated the same. Going to what you said, I can't agree more. Yes, I said earlier we need to get political. I have been political. But yes, I have been missing the point about this. I've been political in the refugee rights movement. But we need to start questioning, what are our governments doing? How are they profiting from what's going on in places like Syria, Sudan, all across the world, and also historically? In Berlin in 1884, Africa was carved up and served out to European powers. And we know that. And what's happening in certain African countries today is a consequence of what happened then. We can't say we don't have a responsibility to the people who are fleeing to Europe. We absolutely do. It's our fault. So yes, it's time to get together, to get political, to get the facts together and question our governments and institutions that apparently have these laws and make a change.
Lorna, I have to jump in with the language thing, because that reminds me, every time you go into an Italian restaurant in Berlin, they're like, come on, buonasera, and blah, 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 and they speak to you in Italian, and everyone loves it, and the Germans really fetishize Italian culture, and they love it. But I always think when I'm in that environment, if I was to go into a Turkish Dönerladen and they spoke to everyone in Turkish, people would not enjoy that. And it's kind of like what I said in my presentation about this idea that some foreign cultures and international views are positive and others are negative. And I just think a lot of people, going back to this question about your own prejudices or your biases, this doesn't register with a lot of people that they do this, that they view it okay for a French mom to be speaking French with her daughter. Oh, that's great, she's going to grow up zweisprachig, wie schön, blah, blah, blah. And if it's Arabic, then it's somehow negatively viewed. And Darnell, I mean, we're arrogant and we're also very forgetful, I think, as humans, because we have dealt with refugees before on this continent. The Balkan crisis in the 90s was not. It was about the same or even larger than what we're facing right now. And if those who were in the Migration Matters presentation yesterday, international migration has stayed constant at 3.2%. We overblow it as this huge issue that needs to be dealt with, but it's, you know, we allow for the movement of money and the movement of goods, and for some reason when it comes to people, we freak out about it. And I think that we need to learn how to, we become political, yes, and also learn how to analyze what we see in the media more and have more informed discussions about it.
Thank you very much. And I think I'll open to the floor just one more time, because I think I saw someone with a hand who wanted to ask a question. Okay, and I think we'll make this our last question.
First of all, is it working? Yeah. First of all, I would like to say that what you all do and work for is really amazing. My question has to do about the willingness of these migrants to participate in the activities that you organize. Are they willing? Are you happy with the participation rate that you have in your events? And for example, do they have trust issues at the beginning? So how do you see this aspect of your work? And also I have a small question for Sophia. In your presentation, I heard several times you said Kurdistan when you talked about the guy, I think it's Orhan. I really wonder where is Kurdistan? So if you could tell me, I would be glad. Thank you.
Would you like to start with that one, and then we'll move on to the question?
I feel like I need to pull up the map again, but I'm not an expert. I mean, I know Kurdistan is not a recognized country, and they have conflicts, right? I mean, are you asking me because you know and you're double testing me? He's from the predominantly Kurdish part of Turkey, is where Orhan was from. If I made a mistake in my presentation, please feel free to correct me.
It's just a very complicated issue, and I think it has to do with terminology. There is no state or no place called Kurdistan in Turkey, but the rebels who fight there want to create that state, but there's no way within Turkey having another state, and maybe unwillingly you created one in your presentation.
Oh, no, I know it's not official. I just know that that's how he recognizes where he's from.
I don't think so, anyway.
But I wonder if depending on whose story is being told and who gets to choose the terminology, I think that might be it's a very delicate issue, but I think it's one that the person whose story is being told should choose. And maybe we should open now for, how do you view the participation of the people that you are organizing these activities for? How is it? Could it be better? Or, yes, I'll open now. Who would like to start?
I would just briefly say that it's the trust is an issue. You have to gain trust in the beginning, and then once you have that, it works. But even still, participation is low at best. It's difficult. Timing is an issue. Motivation, as I mentioned earlier when I was speaking, it's motivation, pure and simple. If there's no motivation to do anything, then so.
Okay, June.
One of the things I noticed is about the constant changes of volunteers, because connected to the point of trust, if there's no continuity to have the same volunteers, because it's a human interacting with another human, and that takes time. And you have to remember these are, vulnerable individuals that we are working with. And, so it's great that we have a lot of volunteers who are willing and committed to come, but if there's no continuity and the residents have to deal with different new faces each time, having to tell their story each time, that's one factor that can lose their motivation. I think there has to be different activities catered to different groups. I mean, again, I do psychosocial stuff, so obviously the needs for families are different of the needs of an individual man who's separated, left their family, and is here in Berlin by himself, and to kind of throw activities and say you have to get out and come and take part in this is something that's not going to work. So it's really important to first understand where they're coming from, what are their real issues, because the individual man, all he's thinking about is my family safe, are my children safe, when can they get here, when can I get my papers. The majority of cases right now is get me out of here and find me a flat. Forget about all the activities you were doing, get me out of the flat, get me out of here, find me a flat where I can have my own space, where I can function as a human for the first time. This is a functional also problem in the confined and kind of abnormal spaces they are living in. And this is a very fundamental sort of issues that I think we need to first address before we kind of list up all these activities. So yeah, participation sometimes is difficult, and I think that is a sign. If people don't want to participate, I think we should not force them. And I think there is definitely a need that we need to maybe professionalize some more volunteers, give them more training, maybe start paying volunteers for specific activities like translators. Translators is such an important bridge, cultural gap to bridge when it comes to language as well. So that for me is the biggest need. I think that I'm trying to actually lobby the shelter where I'm working to really start paying volunteers, as official translators, let's say. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, June. And Mohsen, would you like to add anything?
Well, I think if you're an event manager and you're designing an event for any kind of target group, you have to look at some factors, and these factors are the same factors that you have to look at when you design an activity for a group of refugees. You have to address real needs. It has to be exciting. It has to be specific. It has to be relevant. The time and space should make sense. So if you take those factors into account, yes, you get a good participation. You get good feedback from the people you're designing it for. It's, for me, it's not really any different from designing any other kind of event.
So going back to June's point as well about professionalizing it, it's the same thing. We should compare it to any other professional activity. If participation is high, it's something that it's obviously a show that it's something that is working well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not any different.
Okay. Yeah. Anyone else would like to, Lorna?
I think also we have to think about put ourselves in those people's shoes. They didn't want to leave their country. They didn't come to Berlin because they thought it was cool, like I did. And so they're not going to go, oh, look, somebody's doing this art thing or somebody's doing this music thing, and isn't that nice? It needs to be very clear, why are these people doing that? Because actually, some of my friends who are refugees, they're a lot of people don't get it. Why is this British girl organizing walking tours about Syria in Berlin? So you also have to talk to people and say, well, we're doing it because these are our objectives and this is how we feel. And that way people will be much more receptive than if you're just oh, we want to help refugees, because that's just not the way to go about it.
Thank you. Anyone else like to, Alen?
Well, I think nobody here can be satisfied with the level of participation, because otherwise we wouldn't be here today. And basically, again, I have to come back to the approach of engaging people within the community. Because, even if somebody come to your building and say, okay, I'm offering some kind of course or whatever, and put it on the board, how many people from the building would apply for that course? Not everyone, because not everyone has interest in that thing. So for that reason, I think that people who are making lectures and making activities and who are coming from the community, I think they know better what the people within the community need. What are their needs? What are their interests? How to address those people? And that is why we found this very important, and to have these people as a reference point, as a multipliers, who would inspire other people to do the same thing. Of course, nobody is satisfied with the level. I would be lying if I say that we are satisfied, but the success is there. We are not at the starting point. We moved further from that.
Thank you very much. And Sophia and Robert, would you like to, Sophia, would you like to add anything? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think we're going to call it a day with the panel, but I think we've definitely shared and aired a lot of views. We've not always agreed, which I think is a good thing, but I think the things we've definitely agreed upon are that we need to connect more. So hopefully out of this symposium, we have got these new networks that we can rely on, and we can share skills, share ideas, and also help each other with each other's problems. We can maybe see it from another point of view and say, well, this is what's working with me, maybe you could try this. And I really do hope, and this was one of the main reasons that we started this symposium, was to kind of put people in touch. And the same goes for the audience. So if you'd like to get in touch with any of our panelists, we will be publishing their information on our Facebook event page. So please do stay in touch. And I'd like to say one more last, a large round of applause for Lorna, Robert, Sophia, Alen, June, and Mohsen. Thank you very, very much.